Hello, Wazobia Code developers. Welcome back to Wazobia Code. The last video introduced you to React State Management with UState. This video will introduce you to event handling in React. So what is an event in React? An event is anything that a user does to interact with your page. Maybe a user clicks on a button. Maybe they input data to a text form. Maybe they even submit a form. These are events in React. And what is event handling? Well, event handling is the act of making your page respond to the events that users make to your app. Maybe you want your page to alert whenever someone clicks a button, or you want the text box value to be logged to the console whenever it changes. Event handling can help you achieve this and so much more. In this video, we will be looking at three types of events in React. We're going to be looking at click events and how to handle them with onClick, change events and how to handle them with onChange, and submit events and how to handle them with onSubmit. Let's get started with click events and how to handle them with onClick. Click events are events that happen when users click on elements on your page. Usually these elements are buttons. Let me show you an example on Replit. So this is our Wazobia Code React practice repo. Let's say we want to create a component that has a button, and every time you click a button, we want an alert to pop up and tell us that that button has been clicked. Let's go ahead and start building this. So the first thing we want to do is create the file. Let's call it click event.jsx. Okay, move it into the SRC folder and open our click event folder, our click event file. Then we're going to export. And then right now, all we're going to do is return a div that says click event. Okay, so now we're going to import this in our app.jsx and display it. And then we're going to display it down here. Close this. And then we can see our click event component is being shown. So what we're trying to do is that we are trying to create a button. And then every time you click on this button, we want an alert to show and tell you that the button has been clicked. Well, the first step we're going to do to achieve this is we're going to create this function that pops up and alerts that a button has been clicked. So let's create our function. Function can be named anything, but I want to call it a handle click. This has no argument. And then what we want to do is alert you clicked me. Okay. So now we're going to create our button. Click me. Add a smiley face to differentiate it from the other button. Okay, good. So now the question is, how do you associate this function, handle click, with this button? Well, this is where onClick comes in. So to associate the function with the button, all we have to do is write onClick equals to handle click. And then when we click, we notice that this happens. So that is exactly how you can use onClick to handle click events in React. The next event we can talk about is change event. Let's say you have an input box in your website that users can interact with. When a user types into that input box, React recognizes that as an event. The onChange event handler can be used to respond to such change events. Okay, let's go back to Replit from a demonstration. Okay, we're back in Replit. Let's create a component that we're going to use to demonstrate change events. So we're going to add a file, change events .jsx. add it to our SRC, open it, the regular thing, export default change event. Then we're going to return a simple div with a H1 that says change event. Okay. Copy this. Why is this an error? Oh, function. Okay, we're good. So we're going to go into app.jsx and we're going to import this. So import change event from change event. And then we're going to come in here and we are change event. I named the file change event, not change event. Okay. So we are going to come in here and we're going to okay, so we have our change event component over there. So we're going to go into the component and we're going to start coding. So what we want is an input text box, and whenever the input text box changes, we want an alert that tells us that the input text box has changed. So let's create a function that does that, that lets us function handle change. Okay, now we're going to alert change has happened. Okay, so now let's create our input text box. Input type text. And then here's our input text box. So we're going to come in here and we're going to type, and we notice nothing happens. Why does nothing happen? Because we haven't associated our function yet to the input text box. Okay, how do you associate the function to change events in the input text box? This is where onChange comes in. onChange, we want to handle change. So now when we come here and we type in, changes happen. After every single letter, we get an alert that tells us that a change has happened. That is very useful. But then, what if we want to know the value of the text box whenever the change happens? How do we enable that? Well, we can do that by grabbing the event itself, grabbing the input text box, and then grabbing the value of the input. How do you do that? Well, remember how I said that event handlers are used to react to events. Since they're used to react to events, you can actually pass in the event as an input to the function that handles the event. So this function handles our event, and we know that it's an event handler, so it reacts based on an event. So you can actually make it grab the event. So now it is grabbing the change event. Okay, so now we have the change event. But then we want the value inside the object that is being changed. So let's create a constant to store it. Constant value equals to, so this is going to be inside the event. The event happens inside the target. The target is the input box. So we want to grab the target. So event target. Now we want to grab the value inside the target, the value inside the input box. So event.target the value. And this is how you're able to grab the value inside the text box when you change it. And then how do we display that? We can just alert value. So that when we change, all we see is the value of the input box that we changed. This is useful, but what you notice is that this actually can disturb the user because every single time you type, they are alerted that they have made a change. Wouldn't it be better if the user finishes typing and then they click on submit, and then we can then tell them what they've put into the input box? That is exactly where the onSubmit event handler comes in. So lastly, we're going to look into submit events. Submit events are for when you have a form. You can use the submit event handler to react to form submissions. Let us show you how to do this. So we are back in Replit. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new component. Submit event.jsx. Put that in the SRC. Open it up. So we're going to export default function. Submit event. And then we're just going to return a div with a h1 submit event. Okay, we're going to copy this and we're going to import it and put it in our okay, and then we're going to put it in here. Okay, so let's go in here. So what we're going to do is that we're going to create a form and we're going to create an input box inside that form. And we want that whenever the form is submitted, we want the value of the input box to be alerted. So let's create our form. Let's create the input box. So the input we're going to ask for is the user's name. So input your name, just repeat out to give instructions. And then we want an input box. Input type text. Okay, good. So what we want is that whenever this input box is changed, okay, and now we create a button that you can use to submit the form. Button. Submit form. Okay, let's put this one line under. Okay, so what we want is that the user can come into the input box and type as much as they want. And then when they click submit form, and only when they click submit form, we want the value of the input box to be displayed. So this is something where you're going to need to use two event handlers. One event handler is going to keep track of what the user is typing into the input box, and we're going to store that into a state. The second event handler is going to alert whenever the user clicks on the submit form, whenever the user submits the form. So we're going to have to chain the onChange event handler and a new event handler on submit. Okay, so let's talk about how we're going to do the onChange handler to handle the user's input whenever they put in their name. So think about it. We want a variable to store the user's name, and we want this variable to change every single time the user types into the input box. What does this sound like? If you said state, you are 100% right. We want to create a state, call it name, and then create the function to change that state. Call it change name. Start that state as an empty string. And whenever the user types into our input box, we want to set that name state to the value of the input box. So let's do that. Let's do that. The first thing we need to do is we need to import useState. So import useState from React. And then we're going to create our state. Const name set name equals to useState. Good. So now, remember, we want a scenario where every single time the user types into the input box, we want to call the setName function to change the name state to the current value of the input box. How do we do that? Well, we know we're going to need to use our onChange, and then we need a function that grabs the event, then sets the name to the value of the input box. So this is how we can do this in one line. We grab the event. This is us grabbing the event. And then what do we do when we grab the event? We call our function set name. And then what do we put inside set name? Event dot target dot value. Okay, so that's exactly what we're going to do. We grab the event inside here, and then we set the name state to the event dot target dot value. That is what this line of code does. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is that we want, whenever we click the submit button, we want the name state to be logged out. So we can create a function for that. Function handle submit. And then what we're going to do is alert name. Okay. So now, how do we associate this handle submit function to submission of our forms? Well, there are two things we need to do. The first thing we need to do is call the onSubmit event handler and give it the value of our handle submit function. The second thing we need to do is that we need to specify the submit button. This is our button. We need to tell this button that it is the button that we're going to use for our submissions of the form. And how do you do that? Well, all you need to do is do type and submit. So now we succeeded. Now, if we come over here and we type a name and we click submit form, we see that whatever we typed gets alerted. What just happened? What we had inside our input box disappeared. Let's do that again. Done. When I click OK, it disappears. That is strange. And not only does it disappear, my entire page reloads. So that means if I had something inside here, something that was important, G, and I came here and I clicked in submit form, I lose every single thing I had on my page that was important to me. So this is the default action of the submission forms. Whenever you submit a form, the form tries to send the data inside the form to your backend. And after it does that, it reloads the page. Since we have no backend to send data to, we don't need this to happen. And how do we prevent this from happening? Well, we prevent it from happening in our function. How do we do that? Well, the first thing we need to do is that we need to grab the event. This is a submit event. So in here, we grab the event. And then after we grab the event, what do we do to the event? Well, we do event.prevent default. Okay, so like I said, reloading the page is the default action of the submit event. So we're grabbing the submit event and then we're preventing the default action, which is reloading, from happening. And then we are alerting. So if we come here now and we submit the form, our page doesn't reload. So that is all for handling submit events with onSubmit. Congratulations, you've learned all about event handlers. The next step we're going to take in this lecture is that we're going to update our recipe sharing app to use event handlers. Let's go over to Replit to show you this. So here we are, we're back in Replit. Let's open our recipe sharing app repo. Okay, this is our recipe sharing app repo. And then so what we want to do is that we want to create a button. And when that button is clicked, we want to hide our recipe ingredients or show our recipe ingredients. And create another button. When that button is clicked, we want to hide our recipe steps or show our recipe steps. Okay, so I just moved the result of the page to the other tab. Okay, so let's talk about how we are going to do this. Well, this is going to be a combination of event handlers and conditional rendering of components. This was taught in our JSX syntax video. So, how are we going to do this using event handlers and conditional rendering? Well, the first step is that we're going to need to create our buttons for hiding or showing recipe ingredients. So let's create the button over here. Button. Let's call it toggle recipe ingredient. Okay, I'm going to copy this. Same thing, toggle recipe steps. Okay, good. So now we have our button, but now we have to add our functionality that shows the recipe ingredients when we click the toggle button and delete it when we click it again. So what does that sound like? So if you remember, conditional rendering works based off Boolean values. So it would have a value, and then if true, if the value was true, then we would render something. If the value was true, then we'll render value is true. But if the value was false, we would render value is false. Then we can see value is true here. If we come here and change this to false, false, value is false. So that's exactly what we're trying to achieve with our recipe ingredients and recipe steps. We want to create a Boolean state called show recipe ingredients and then create a function to change it, says show recipe ingredients. And the same thing for show recipe steps. And when show recipe ingredients is true, we want to show recipe ingredients. But when it's false, we don't want to show anything. We want it to be completely empty. Same for recipe steps as well. So let me delete this. And then let's go create our states. Create them over here. So let's start with recipe ingredients. So const. First, we import state, which has been done on line 1. Use state is imported on line 1. So we're going to create our state, show recipe ingredients. And then the function changes, set show recipe ingredients. And then what we're going to start this off. Let's start it off as false. Okay, so we've done this. Do the same thing for show recipe steps, const show recipe steps, use state. Start it off as false. Okay. And then now we're going to use that Boolean value to show the recipe ingredients or not show it, or show the recipe steps or not show it. So how do we do that? So show recipe ingredients. If it's true, you want to show the recipe ingredients component. If it's false, you want to show an empty div. Okay, there you go. Obviously, the recipe ingredients aren't going to show. Why? Because we started the state as false. If it started off as true, we're going to the recipe ingredients shows. But what we want to do now is that we want to enable this button to have the ability to switch our show recipe ingredients state to true or false, depending on the current value. Say the current value of recipe ingredients is true, we want our button to set it to false. If the current value of it is false, we want our button to set it to true. Well, we know that is going to be an on-click event. So let's create a function that does that. So we create our function, toggle show recipe ingredients. Okay. And then what do we do? So I said if show recipe ingredients is true, we want to set it to false. But if show recipe ingredients is false, we want to set it to true. Okay. We could use an if statement to do it. We could do if show recipe ingredients set show recipe ingredients to false. Else set show recipe ingredients to true. Okay, that was quick. So now this is the function we've created to handle the click event. How do we associate that function to this button? Well, easy. On click, yes. So now we come here So there's an error. This should be set show recipe ingredients. Set recipe ingredients. So reload the page. Okay. So there you go. So the function changes the value of show recipe ingredients to true or false. And then when we click it, it sets it to false. So recipe ingredients doesn't show. We click it, it sets it to true. And recipe ingredients shows. So let's see. Can we make this function better? Is there a way we can make this function one line of code? Well, let's think about it. Show recipe ingredients is Boolean. Show recipe ingredients is true or false. So in a scenario, let's imagine a scenario where show recipe ingredients was true. What is not show recipe ingredients? If show recipe ingredients is true, not show recipe ingredients must be equals to false. If show recipe ingredients was false, not show recipe ingredients is going to be true. Because that's exactly what not does, yes? Not takes a Boolean value and returns the negation, the opposite of that Boolean value. So if we set show recipe ingredients to not show recipe ingredients, we are setting show recipe ingredients to the opposite of the current value of show recipe ingredients. So we can actually change all of this to simply this. And then delete this. And delete this. Delete this as well. And then it would do the exact same thing. Because what this is doing is setting show recipe ingredients to the opposite of its current value. We can even take this one step further. We can improve this by taking it one step further. How? Here in the onClick function, we can easily do this. Delete this. Make it an arrow function that calls the set show recipe ingredients function already. It doesn't need to call another function that calls the function. We can just call the function directly. So set show recipe ingredients, not show recipe ingredients. Then we delete this. And then what we realize is that it does the same thing. So what we've done is that instead of calling a function that ends up calling our set show recipe ingredients function, we have just called the show recipe ingredients function directly. And then we've given it the value to show to set the show recipe ingredients to, which is the opposite of the current value of set show recipe ingredients. So we are going to come over to show recipe steps and do the exact same thing. So we have our button, we have our recipe steps, conditional rendering, show recipe steps. If show recipe steps is true, show recipe steps. If it's false, show an empty div. Okay, so obviously it gets disappeared, but then we come over to our button on click. We're going to do a one-liner set show recipe steps. I'm going to set it to the opposite of the current value, show recipe steps. And then we come here and we see our functionality works. So that is how we have used conditional rendering and we have used event handlers to make our recipe sharing app better. In the next video, we're going to use CSS styling to make our recipe sharing app look really good. That's all the content we have for today. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you understood the concepts explained in this video. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. Stay tuned to learn how to code with Wazobia Code.